Hello everyone, glad to say doing another video. This is, I don't know how many I've done. I think altogether I've done about 46, so this will be my 47th video. I'm pleased to say that I've got a new edition of books and subjects to talk about, be they directly Berlin related and those that in some way connected to Berlin. So let's make a start, shall we? Now I've got this book here. It's called A German General on the Eastern Front, the Letters and Diaries of Gotthard Heinrici, 1941 to 1942, and this is by Johannes Herter, and this is a translation. The book was translated by Christine Brooks. Now this is just the latest acquisition. I think I got this 2 days ago. Now Gotthard Heinrici was a name that kept cropping up in this particular book. Cornelius Rhine's The Last Battle, which in my estimation is the greatest book that I've ever read on Berlin, bar none. It's an absolutely fabulous book, and his name kept cropping up all the time throughout the text. And I thought, who is this Heinrici? You know, I've never heard of him, because he's not like a general like, say, a Rommel or a Manstein or von Rundstedt or a Guderian. You know, he's sort of like a general whose name doesn't really appear in a lot of the well-known history books of that era of World War II, and yet he made such a prominent role at the beginning of World War II and in Barbarossa, and also at the end of the war, and the coming to the last days of the war with the defence of the Seelow Heights. And if you read any of the books on Hitler in his bunker, he does make an appearance in the Hitler bunker, and that was a moment that Heinrici, who stood his ground and said it as he saw it, and he gave truth to power, and he said how treacherous, how difficult and how bloody the Eastern Front is, and how difficult it is to defend. And there was a colleague, I can't, off the top of my head, I can't remember the name of that person, but he kept saying "hau up, hau up, hau up," which is a German word meaning stop, stop, stop. You know, because he was telling it as it is, as it was happening on the Eastern Front. So Heinrici was a man who, with great integrity, a soldier who'd was in the First World War, and he remained a soldier after the First War, after the defeat of the First World War, throughout his time in the 20s and the 30s, and then going into the war. So, and I'm going to read you a little excerpt from it. If my see, because these glasses aren't my reading glasses, so I'm going to have to use a magnifying glass. Do excuse me for that, but this is something I'll read for you. It's a little passage I'll read. It says, "I've saved the last." This is the acknowledgements page of Cornelius Rhine's book. It says, "I have saved to the last my thanks to Colonel General Gotthard Heinrici for the German side of the story. Over a period of 3 months, we shared countless interviews and conversations. He fought each phase of the battle again. He allowed me to use his personal notes, documents and war diaries. Even though he was plagued by illness, he always gave generously of his time. Without him, I do not think this book could have been written. In some 20 years as a writer, I have rarely encountered a man of such dignity and honour, nor one with such memory for detail." I think that says it all with Colonel General Heinrici. This man here. that was always like in the many years, because when I first read this book, it was in the 1980s, and it's only now do I actually have a book from him. You know, I wish there would be a biographer, a historian, or someone that will be able to write a book on, a biography on Gotthard Heinrici. But this is what we have so far. So I'm really, really glad that I picked this book up, and then I can actually go through something, because he is known for his details, for the details, the descriptions of what it was like on the East German front. And it also goes, it says a lot about the man himself, that he would write something like this. So a lot of the letters to his wife are reprinted here in this book. So the German general on the Eastern Front, the letters and diaries of Gotthard Heinrici, 1941 to 1942, by Johannes Herter, translated by Christine Brooks. Okay, so let's see what I can do here. Okay, this is another latest acquisition. This is not a book that I've had a long time. I've only just recently got this book. So holding this book is quite heavy in and of itself. This is called Battleground Berlin: The CIA versus the KGB in the Cold War. This is by David E. Murphy, Sergei A. Kondrashev, and George Bailey. Now, this is a book that I've seen a lot on the internet, but I never ever thought of picking it up, and I eventually did get to pick it up because of the price. Because the price, it was really going for a good price, and I thought, yeah, I'll pick this book up now. Some of my viewers will pay attention to what I'm about to say, but it's really worth repeating, and certainly for the newer viewers, it's worth my repeating what I'm about to say. The CIA, I believe, played a pivotal downfall to the fall of the Berlin Wall. How they did this, I do not know, but there are clues. And for any time there is a kind of a revolution, shall we say, to put it bluntly, it's as a result of protest. It's about having protesters out on the street protesting, and they're doing it day after day, week after week, month after month. Now, towards the end of the East German regime, there were these protests in Berlin, there were these protests in Leipzig, there were protests, I believe, in Dresden and other large cities. When you have these protests, it's a pressure. It's like a pressure cooker that's being percolated, and it can actually overthrow a regime. Now, this is something the KGB are not the KGB, beg your pardon, I misspoke. The CIA are very, very good at. The first time, or one of the first times, I think, where they started to use this technique is the overthrow of Mossadegh in 1953 in Iran. Now, if you're paying attention to the news on the mainstream media, you will also know that you have these protests in Iran today. The protests eventually simmered down as a result of the Iranian government getting on top of Starlink. Starlink was a form of communication, or satellite for communication, if I remember correctly, by Elon Musk, that was smuggled into the country, and the Iranians were able to jam that particular system. Not only that, they were able to bring down the phone lines, telecommunications, and the internet. And this then brought the end of the protest. But I believe that protest was contrived. It was contrived by, as I perceive it, by the CIA and Mossad. MI6 may have been involved. I'm not sure 100%. We may never know. I may never know. Why am I bringing this to bear? It's because a lot of these protests have been contrived. They've been controlled. They've been planned. They've been put into practice ever since the overthrow of Mossadegh. So many governments have been overturned using this particular method. Why I mentioned the fall of the Berlin Wall is because the CIA bought three pieces of the Berlin Wall. They're like L-shaped prefabs that were put together by the East German regime. After the fall of the Berlin Wall, they were able to buy pieces of the Berlin Wall, and they were able to take it back to Langley in Virginia, and Langley's where the CIA have their headquarters. So every time you walk past or every time you go into the headquarters of the CIA, you have to pass these three pieces of the Berlin Wall. Now, the CIA wouldn't just go out of their way to buy three pieces of the Berlin Wall. I mean, why would they? I mean, for what purpose? Unless, of course, they were intrinsically involved in its downfall, and I believe they were. I believe this was set up. How they did it, I can only guess. It's just that I don't have the information, I don't have the insider knowledge, and I may never know. But I can only speculate. And I suspect that this was a long-term practice. By that I mean they were observing the regime, they were studying the regime, they were doing everything they can to disrupt the East German economy. They were putting people that were agitators in amongst the meetings that were taking place in the churches in and around Berlin and Greater Eastern Germany. There were people that were there to instigate these protests in order to put pressure on the East German regime in whatever way they can, with the hope of bringing down the Berlin Wall, which they clearly succeeded. Were there other factors involved? I'm sure there were. I'm sure, like the propaganda, for example, of the television that was beamed into Eastern Germany, I'm sure it all played its part. And then there's the shadow war. By that I mean that you had CIA or members of the CIA that were observing the border guards, what they were doing, when do they have their changeover. By that I mean from one group of soldiers to another set of border guards. And I say soldiers, I mean they were border guards effectively. How long they were on stag, what were their communications like, were there any mistakes in anything that they were doing at any point in time, so that it was anything that they could do in some ways to infiltrate the East German border guards and East Germany and East Berlin itself. With as much determination, I want to try and find out as much as I possibly can in how this was done. But I don't know if there are any memoirs written. Certainly when I read this book, I'm sure I'll find a lot of clues, and then there will be the end notes. So I will go through the end notes to find out as much as I can, if at all possible. Any members of the CIA wrote their memoirs and left clues in their books. So anyway, this is called Battleground Berlin, CIA versus the KGB in the Cold War. by David E. Murphy, Sergei A. Kondrashev, and George Bailey. Probably sort of said that as well. Okay, this is also a pretty recent acquisition. This is a book called The Defense of Berlin by Jean Edward Smith. This book was published in 1963. I love books that have been published as the Berlin Wall was up. So the Berlin Wall was already up for 2 years at this point, and it said Defense of Berlin. Personally, I don't think there is a defense of Berlin. I don't think Berlin could have been defended. The reason being, it was because it was an East German territory, and East Berlin or West Berlin is surrounded effectively, so it wouldn't take much to actually take the city. And I think the Americans and the British and the French knew this, but all they could do was to be a thorn in the side of the East German regime by being in West Berlin. And this talk of freedom and democracy and human rights is just a smokescreen. It's not something that I would attach any value to at all. This book actually does, in a sense, give some clue in what the West were trying to do while being in East Berlin, and that is to find out as much as they possibly can about the Russians that were there, or at least the Soviet Union as they were known at that time, what they were doing, what were their planning, what were their strategies, were there any weaknesses in any of their military capabilities, and the same for the East German regime. Was there anything that they were doing that would leave themselves open and be vulnerable to from attacks from the West, not militarily, but certainly economically, politically, and in some other way. That's why Khrushchev was so desperate to try and at least capture West Berlin without shedding any blood, without triggering World War III, because that was the fear on both sides. That's why both sides were desperate to keep the war cold. But he really wanted West Berlin simply because the West were there. They were in West German or East German territory, and he wanted to be rid of them so that because he recognised how vulnerable West Germany is, having West Berlin having access to the West in West Berlin. This was the difficulty that they had to contend with, and Walter Ulbricht knew this, and Erich Honecker knew this, and Khrushchev knew this, and Brezhnev knew this, but there was nothing they can do. And clearly, at the end of the day, as the Berlin Wall fell, they saw how vulnerable they really were, and how the Cold War was effectively won by the West. What is symbolic is the American Embassy. I mentioned in my previous video that the American Embassy is situated right next to the Brandenburg Gate. But where it is built, it's built on old East German territory. It wasn't built in West Berlin, or the old West Berlin, as we now would call it. It's in East Berlin. So not only do they have their embassy right next to the Brandenburg Gate, they have it in East Berlin, as if to say, we won the Cold War, and effectively that's exactly what happened. They did win the Cold War. So, The Defense of Berlin by Jean Edward Smith. let's see. Okay, so what I have here is a book called The Spy Catcher, a candid autobiography of the senior intelligence officer by Peter Wright, former assistant director of MI5 with Paul Greengrass. Now, when this book came out, it was a scandal. Margaret Thatcher did everything in her power to actually have this book withdrawn. Now, why I mention it is because of this man, The Truth About Hollis by W.J. West. He was the head of MI5, and he was suspected of being a communist, and that he was like some kind of a double agency. And Peter Wright, I believe, knew it, and yet he was kept. Roger Wallace was kept in his post. The head of MI5. The conclusion I draw is George Blake. Now, when George Blake escaped from Wormwood Scrubs, I believe, or I perceive it, I suspect that Roger Hollis knew this, and he did everything in his power to make sure that George Blake got away. I can't prove it, I can only suspect it. But I know that there is a book where it pertains to that, where they actually say about, there is this belief that George Blake was able to get away with the help of Roger Hollis, the head of MI5. This is worth investigating, looking in a lot, into the subject a lot deeper. But it just seems to me that with the connections, with joining up the dots, that Roger Hollis played a part in George Blake's escape. Again, if we do not have access to the documents, we won't ever know for sure. And even if we did, we wouldn't get, say, all the information. And the last point I'd like to make is the fact that it could be embarrassing to Her Majesty or His Majesty's government and the Crown. So, yeah, was George Blake helped by those in power like Roger Hollis? I believe, or I suspect that he was. So, Spy Catcher by Peter Wright, where he mentions this, where he thinks that Roger Hollis was a communist, and he was giving information to the KGB. This is a biography on him, The Truth About Hollis, by W.J. West. And this book here, George Blake, No Other Choice. And I think he wrote this himself. Yeah. Okay, so we're coming up to the last book. Now this is called Turning Point. This is by Benjamin Tallis, and it says here, Essays on Germany, Ukraine and Europe's Real Zeitenwende. Now this is like a print on demand type book. It has that feel, and I've got quite a few of these kind of print and demand books. I was influenced by the cover. As you can see, this is the Brandenburg Gate, and they beamed this sort of light of the flag of the Ukrainian flag onto the Brandenburg Gate. Now, when I was in Berlin last, I remember seeing 3 flagpoles, and they had the Ukrainian flag on each flagpole. And I took a photo on my mobile phone, and sadly I lost my mobile phone with all those precious photographs on there. But the next time I go to Berlin, I will have a proper camera, and it will be dedicated just to take in photographs and nothing else, rather than using a phone. Using a phone is not ideal for taking. I believe it's not ideal for taking photographs because it's awkward to hold. So ergonomically, to hold it's not ideal. What you really need, or I believe what I would need, is a proper camera. So that's what I'm going to take the next time I go to Berlin. So I believe that Germany is in real big trouble as regards to the situation as it is right now. With the blowing up of the Nord Stream pipeline, which has affected the German economy and the German industry, and as a result, the rapid deindustrialization and the fact that they are in a recession. Also, politically, they're in real trouble because they are supporting the Israelis, and if you're supporting the Israelis, then you are complicit to the genocide in Gaza. And also their support to Ukraine, which the government and their military have factions of neo-Nazism within them. And Germany's tied up in knots, as far as I'm concerned, with their support of Israel and the Ukraine. Now, this book is written from the point of view of the West, so it will have that kind of bias to it, which is fine. It's perfectly fine with me. I've got nothing against it. However, I don't think it's going to do Germany any good. And as far as history is concerned, it's probably going to work out even worse. So when the war actually ends in the Ukraine and the historians start to do the analysis of the war in Ukraine, they will see that Germany won't come out very in a bright light, shall we say. But it's always good to know and to be up to date as to what's happening, and also to find out from those experts and analysis that have the gift of analysis of the situation as it's happening right now. So, in other words, in current affairs. So the current affairs of the war in Ukraine now I would believe is quite critical, and because it's quite critical, I think the end is in sight, where eventually at some point the war in Ukraine is lost. And Germany, I believe, will have they'll have their situation, that they will have the difficulties in coming up with their own reasons as to why they supported the war, when clearly some of them, I'm sure, would have known, and those politicians and the elites would have known that it was a lost cause. So the book that I'm holding up is by Benjamin Tallis, Turning Point, Essays on Germany, Ukraine and Europe's Real Zeitenwende. I mean, this will take a while to read, and I'm sure it's bone dry, but I will go on to read it. Now, on a lighter note, I will talk about some more gin. This is Corsican lemon and elderflower gin. I bought this in Sainsbury's. Sainsbury's is a famous supermarket for those that are from the United States and Europe. So this is a sort of a home brand one. When I first saw it, I sort of thought, oh, the gin's got this kind of yellowish colour to it, only to realise that this bottle is actually tinted. So when you pour it, it would actually come out clear. this gin, I didn't pay much money for it actually, because the average price I would say for a gin is between say 25, £30 going up to £40. You know, if it's more than that, over £40, I would say it's quite expensive. But for the money, this is a 70 cl. This is at 37.5 APV. I have it in cocktails. I have actually had a little swig of it. Neat. I might give it another go actually. God. Wow. It's really quite overwhelming neat. Perhaps I shouldn't have done that. But yeah, your best bet is to have this clearly with a tonic. You know, I wouldn't do it without. I wouldn't suggest you have it neat, but you have it with a tonic. Try it with soda water. Try it with Sprite. Try it in a cocktail. There's no rules as to how to drink this gin. Obviously, you know, if you're into gin and tonic, fine. You know, have it with a tonic. But it's always good to experiment and try it with different things and see what you like and see what you don't like. The other recommendation I would make, or at least observation, put it that way, is if you don't like a liquor, and it doesn't have to be gin, it could be a vodka, it could be whiskey, it could be tequila, whatever, and you say, I don't like it, you can do one of two things. You can either give it away to somebody who you know you might think would actually like to have a gin or a whiskey, or you just keep it in your cupboard. Keep it in your cupboard, give it 6 months, and then have another go and see if you like it, because your palate will change over time. So what you thought you didn't like 6 months ago, you might not now like. So take it from me, I highly recommend that you don't, you know, don't spill it, don't pour it down the plug hole. Keep hold of it. Try it in 6 months. The alternative to that is you can make a cocktail. Try and come up with a cocktail of it. And I'm sure that at some point that you'll find, you know, you don't have to be a mixologist to be able to make a cocktail. You can just experiment. You know, try something that may complement the gin and say, oh, I quite like that. After you tried it like I did just then. Neat. I didn't expect it to go down the way it did. But yeah, it was a bit overwhelming to try it neat. But yeah, try it with other than just tonic. Try it with soda water. Try it with ginger ale. Try it with Sprite or 7-Up or something like that. Or you know, you might want a twist of lemon, or you could squeeze of orange. Even a slice of cucumber. Just try it and see how it goes. And if you don't like it, try something else until you do. Okay, that pretty much concludes my presentation. I hope I didn't rat on too long. I hope I made myself quite clear in what I was trying to say. If you are unsubscribed, please subscribe. If you have not subscribed, please do so. Leave us a comment. Tell us what you think. If you have an idea for a video presentation, let us know what it is. Stick, thanks for you leaving a comment. I'm most appreciative of that. And auf Wiedersehen, alles Gute und bitte fall nicht nieder.